Okay, so call this to order. Anita, do you need to have the roll, or can you get that?
Yep, I've got it. We've got Lisa, Al, Chris, Gail, Kim, Anita, and Joe,
And Deb on the way.
and Deb on the way.
Okay, then I would like a motion to approve the agenda. Oh, no, we wanted to add a couple things to the agenda. That's right. We want to talk briefly about the CEO evaluation, which this committee will have some responsibility for through the year. We're not going to do much today. And then I think Deb wanted us to talk a little bit about the board retreat. So could we add those two things to
You want them, where do you want them on the agenda?
under old business?
Yeah.
And then should they be old business or new business? Let's put them under new business. Sorry to.
Okay.
You're right. Yeah. Then the next thing on our agenda would be to ask if there's anybody from the public who would like to address this committee. I don't think there is anybody public online, is there? Okay. Then the next thing to do is talk about the minutes. Did anybody who attended last meeting review the minutes?
I did, and I would go to.
I can second.
Good.
Here.
Then is there any objection to approval of the minutes? And if not, we'll consider those approved. Now, I know that Deb wanted to talk about the revised code of conduct. I think she had some ideas, but we'll start. I hear some clicking of some heels. Right on time. We've gone through the stuff that you really didn't need to be here for, but now we're ready to start talking about the revised board code of conduct. Right on time for that. Are there any comments? So in your packet, you should find the version that the board approved, and then another version that was with some suggested changes, really on my part. And I tried to take out some of the redundancy and put it more into regulatory language. I also took out some things that I wanted to point out. For example, under code of conduct, keep the community informed about issues affecting it. I could not find that as a responsibility in the bylaws, so I took it out. But this is open for us to talk about. And I want to stress, I don't have any personal attachment to the version I came up with. I hope everybody will feel comfortable just speaking up and saying what you'd like changed. This is here just for your comment.
And I also want to add that I don't have any attachment to the version that we created, so that's fine now. Okay.
So, members of staff, suggested changes or criticisms of what we have here?
This was, I thought it was a good capture of what the expectation is. I didn't really have anything to add to it. If there are changes necessary, I don't think I'm at a position where I know what they might be.
Are you talking about the version we've already approved, or are you talking about the proposed version?
It's just proposed version.
I thought the proposed version was a nice iteration of it, just making it more concise and bringing it together. So,
Deb, I think you had some criticisms of it, didn't you?
The only, I didn't bring the old copy with me.
maybe I'll change my mind. Pardon? Maybe I'll change my mind after you refresh my memory.
It was just one of them was just a little bit of language regarding our duty to keep the community informed. And I know that we talked about it and there was a section that you thought that covered, that in your draft that covered it.
I don't remember that. I just pointed out that I had taken that out. And my reasoning was because we have staff that really have that responsibility. And we all have a responsibility to talk to people who talk to us. But I just didn't think we had a responsibility to actually go out into the community. So that, if I'm wrong about that, I hope, does everybody understand the issue here? So
Yeah.
please speak up with your opinion. I just took it out because I didn't think that was a board conduct issue. But
I didn't think it was our responsibility to go out and do it ourselves as much as it was important for us to make sure that we're communicating that. And I think that, when we went out into the community and was informing people of things last fall, we announced that we have this problem, that problem. That was an example of us letting the community know that there were issues with what was happening with the hospital. So I still think it's our responsibility to communicate with the community. I just don't think that we've outlined whose responsibility it is directly. Yes, we do have staff that can do that, but I think overall the board is still responsible to communicate.
And I guess that's where I was coming from. So maybe a language change could be that to ensure that the community is informed, whether it's through staff or whether in the case of what we did with the community meetings, what was direct communication, but our responsibility is to make sure that the community, including the assembly and the CBJ leadership, are informed with what's going on. So in whatever manner that is, that was my take on it, is it's our responsibility that we ensure that at least senior leadership is communicating what's going on.
okay, so I'm not saying this to be argumentative. Maybe this will help us figure out how to craft that language. But when I was looking at that, thinking, okay, our responsibility to keep the community informed. Well, as we operate the hospital, it's somebody's responsibility to make sure skin's prepped before their venous punctures. But that's not really the board's responsibility. It is our responsibility to make sure somebody does it. But it's not our responsibility to ensure, or do you see what I mean? There's so many things that are part of the gears moving in the hospital that somebody has to do. So again, I'm not saying that to be argumentative. I'm just trying to think, how do we craft what we're supposed to do so that we're not saying we have to do something that.
Yeah, I know what you're getting at, but how, and I think it's important that we do come up with some language around communication, because I think sometimes, and I know there's in the past year, there has been this perception in our community that we have not been transparent. And I think that we as a board have to be transparent. I think somewhere we need to have that statement just as far as communication. Because sometimes I do think there's a perception that we operate secretively, even though I certainly don't, but it's important that we are out there because we do serve our community, and we're saying that we serve. The only way we can really serve them is if we're communicating. I know maybe that's.
So well said.
Okay.
Our responsibility is to make sure that the hospital, including the prepping for the puncture, while we don't get in the room with them and inspect, our responsibility is the overall, including everything. Where I am in agreement with Lisa is that very thing. There's a light been shown, or perceived light been shown, on our communication skills, or the perception that we're a black box that is not letting the community know what's going on. So while it's not our direct responsibility, other than in the circumstances that Lisa brought up, I think it's worthwhile to put in our code of conduct that we ensure that the communication is there and that, the community will see, hopefully, that with this statement in there, we're taking that next step, a little bit higher level of responsibility than was perceived we were following through on in the past.
And if it's not in the bylaws, when we review the bylaws, we can always put that into it.
How's this for suggestion? And it's just a suggestion. So if you've got it in front of you, there's number 1, acknowledge your most important duty and so on and so forth. How about if we put in a new number 7? Number 6 being then acknowledge that we have a duty to respect and protect confidential information. Number 7, acknowledge we have a duty to ensure that, and that's where I'm stopped.
Yep.
I'm looking for some words here.
Oh, ensure that.
Ensure that.
So are we getting rid of 7 or replacing
We're
7?
replacing- We're adding, we'll have 8, we'll have 8.
Oh, we're gonna, oh, I see. Okay, gotcha.
So after 6, I just inserted the word acknowledge that we have a duty to ensure that. I think those are the words that hurt people.
Okay, how's it worded in the old one?
Keep the community informed about issues affecting it, which is a little more vague than.
Yeah, it's hard to do.
Okay, where's it out here?
It's
Community- The
here.
community of Juneau's informed. Shouldn't we have a duty to ensure that?
Okay.
the Community of Juneau is informed about, what is it exactly that we want? Somebody help me here with some words.
It's, my brain wants to say issues, but that automatically has a negative connotation in my mind.
About impending changes
Well, we want
We
them.
want more than that.
Yeah.
or
We want the good stuff and the bad stuff.
Right.
about
Or-
impending
I don't know.
changes or I'm thinking the word challenges and I don't know how I got word here.
Yeah, I'm thinking, what comes to my mind is business. But that also has kind of a weird connotation for nonprofit.
Yeah.
I can jump in.
I feel that we need to have it as a board as a whole, because I'm concerned that I don't want an individual board member to feel that they can take it upon themselves to be a spokesman of the board.
Oh, I agree.
Gotcha.
And I feel that truly the spokesperson of the hospital, that the board has empowered the CEO to be that spokesperson, with the direction of the board for the hospital. So when you're talking about communication to the public, that is the board's delegation to the duties of the CEO. So I'm getting a little anxious about this conversation because this is part of the fiduciary responsibilities of the board to have a CEO to be that public spokesperson of the board's duties. So I'm feeling number 1 is a very strong statement that your most important duty is to serve the best interests of the residents of Juneau, and part of that obligation of the board is to have a strong CEO, is to keep the residents of Juneau informed of the hospital operations and our mission.
That's very well said.
Well, there's something else I also want to remind you guys. When we wrote these, we didn't create these from the top of our heads. I actually read codes of conduct that were published by other
That
hospitals.
was legal.
And so that was actually from other hospitals that have that in there about communication with the community. So even though to your point, we do have the CEO, but as a board, we have to make sure that our CEO, that we are actually communicating with the community. It's not just, not us directly, but just making it that part of the code of conduct is that we're going to do that, because I think in many instances, we have failed.
Yeah, because as a board, as individuals, you don't have power. As a
Right.
board, you have substantial power.
Right.
Joe just sent me some proposed language. She's,
Oh, awesome.
he's,
He's not that tired. Not yet, like that.
his suggestion is to keep so whatever your preface is to that, informed of hospital operations and changes. Keeps Signing out on me, that may have, of hospital operations and changes to operations that may have a community impact.
I like impact. Excellent.
Impact is a
I
much
like
better,
that. Perfect.
whether it's a positive or.
Good or bad?
Yes.
Positive, negative.
Yeah, I don't, I don't really like that word because it was so overused in the 80s. But I think we should keep it. We should
We
just.
can go retro, Hal.
Yeah.
We can always do another iteration next year.
How about this? Acknowledge that we have a duty to ensure that the hospital administration informs the community of, the hospital administration informs the community of Juneau about hospital operations and
Yeah.
changes that have.
Because that's really your role, is to ensure that we are doing our duties.
Exactly. I like that. Thank you, Joe.
We just clean this up. Sorry, just have some dead air.
No, you're fine.
Clean this up. Okay, so then what I have is acknowledge that we have a duty to ensure that the hospital administration informs the community of Juneau about hospital operations and changes that have a community impact. Good, are we good on that?
I'm good.
Okay.
Are you good?
Okay. I think that's I think that changes to version 4. So any other members of hospital staff, anybody else here that has any other suggestions or thoughts on this? I should have asked for a motion to consider this before we got debating it.
Oh, I will make a motion to discuss revised board of conduct.
Well, I think we need a motion to accept it.
And I now make a motion to accept.
Okay.
The proposed changes?
Okay, so then the motion is to accept the revised code of conduct form, attestation form that we will ask all the board members to sign with the suggested changes. Item 7.
Can I suggest
Please.
that, yes, accept it, but forward it to the board for approval at its next board?
So that would be the motion. Is there any objection? Okay, good. We're done with that.
Yep.
I'll forward this on. I'll give you my Word file before I leave. Anita,
I have it.
do you have the changes?
Well, you can send me yours yet.
Okay, done with that. Now, here's my agenda. Here we go. What do we have next? The draft bylaws. So you had a draft all redlined in the packet, and for some reason it doesn't perfectly match the version that I think I sent. And I think there were some formatting things that were different. But it's sufficiently similar for our purposes here today. There's just a couple of little things. What I would like to point out, okay, so I took the bylaws and then I just on my own went through and saw some things that looked wrong to me. For example, there were lots of common nouns that were capitalized for reasons I could not understand. And then sometimes they weren't capitalized. And I even found, I think, one case where the word vice president was capitalized in one part of the sentence and not capitalized in another part of the sentence, and maybe even hyphenated sometimes. So I took all the common nouns and put them in lowercase, except that I found some places where people were using common nouns as a stand-in for proper noun. And so then I thought, okay, my rule is that has to be introduced parenthetically somewhere. So for example, if we want to use the word assembly and capitalize it and have it mean the city and borough of Juneau assembly, then somewhere I have to say the city and borough of Juneau assembly, and put in parentheses, capital assembly. So I made those changes and I'm pointing those out to you so you can criticize that if you want. I took many acronyms out because I felt they were unnecessary. Even things like CEO and ERH, which is that's just my approach. And so we can talk about that. And if you don't like that, certainly we'll hear about it and we'll make a decision. Everywhere I found the word and or, I took that out and tried to replace it with the logically correct conjunction, because these conjunctions are how logic is conveyed. So for example, if we say violations must be reported to the board president and or the CEO, I don't know what that means, because that if it's and, you have to report them to both people. And if it's or, you just have to report it to one person. And so I don't know if the policy is to report it to both people or just one person, and the word and or just creates confusion there. So that's what I did. Then there's some other things that I want to go through one at a time and point out to you that I did, even though you could have probably found it on your own. So if we go to section 0113, I added some text on purpose of the hospital board. And so you may like this or you may not like this, but I want to point that out to you.
Where is 113 at?
0113. It should be on page 6.
That's the other issue I have with this. Well, that doesn't make sense.
Can you read the screen?
Okay.
Then another thing that I just did on my own, but in 0141, we had previously some text about 2 physicians. And I know with social title inflation, there's a whole lot of people now using the social title of doctor, but there's also people struggling for this term physician. Optometrists are trying to call themselves eye physicians and others, chiropractors. So I put in these words here. The term physician means a doctor of allopathic or osteopathic medicine licensed in the state of Alaska. So I point that out for your criticism. Maybe I should stop and get these one at a time. We can come back to the purpose of the hospital. Any comments on this one?
On 141 or on 0113?
Let's back up to just the 0141. This idea that we need to
I
define.
do want to go back to 0113
Okay, let's go back right
when
now.
we're ready.
Let's go back to that.
So you and I sort of agreed to disagree, and we're going to bring this to this, the issue to this group. The chief executive officer is not necessarily interchangeable with administrator.
Oh, okay.
In common vernacular, mostly the term CEO of a hospital is used, and administrator is may refer to different types of organizations. So I don't think they're interchangeable in this instance.
I see what you're saying, because we have an administrator at Wildflower Court,
Right.
who is not a CEO.
So, and not that I want to argue about, but I put administrator in because I found the term administrator and the term CEO both used to refer to the same thing, I think, in the previous.
That may be the case, but the previous CEO was having been around in AHA prior to that, the previous CEO was called the administrator. Everybody called him the administrator. That now it's not a common term for this hospital in the current time. So those of you who might have been around during that time. I guess the question is, and Joe and I had a quick conversation about it. It's not, it's, they aren't interchangeable in this hospital. Correct.
So is it, I don't want to, we could spend, hours here fooling around, but I think the committee is giving me direction, I think. Go hunt down every instance of this word administrator and try to replace it with CEO.
Yes. I agree.
And I'm probably not going to use CEO, probably just use Chief Executive Officer.
Which is fine. I don't have any trouble with that.
Okay. And is that, what else?
Can I ask you a separate question on this?
Yes, please.
So in 0113, it refers to hospital multiple times. Do we define the hospital as, is the hospital and all the sub-entities? Because when we think about the hospital is a licensed entity, and we have multiple other entities that fall outside of that kind of definition, right? So we're trying to get back to how we define things. Is it, because we have lots of clinics that aren't technically fall underneath the hospital, but they fall underneath my, chain of command. I just want to make sure we're defining things appropriately. Not
Maybe
split hairs.
Bartlett?
Yeah, we should have a definition of the entity.
So could that be fixed if we went back up to 011?
I think we fix it at the top, yeah.
0111, when you have the name.
The hospitals, we know, I was going to say, instead of the hospitals, in some of these places, should we put this hospital and related operations? Would that solve your?
Yeah,
Because we've never incorporated Wildflower Court's bylaws into the hospital bylaws.
Do we want to?
I think we have.
do
They
you
can't,
have, do
We
you
would-
operate as a separate board for them? Do they have their own standalone set of bylaws outside these?
we need to update their bylaws or at least have a small bylaws that says our hospital bylaws are cover Wildflower Court, because we've never updated their bylaws since we've incorporated them into Bartlett. So the board's going to have to do something and then have maybe something in this bylaws.
Okay, so we've got, if I could back up and let's start up at 0111 and work our way down. Try to bring this all in. So the governing body of Bartlett Regional Hospital, the hospital, shall be known as Board of Directors of Bartlett Regional Hospital. Should we change that to the Board of Directors of Bartlett Regional Hospital and related operations? Does that solve anybody's problem?
Maybe related services.
Joe, do you have any thoughts on that?
I understand what you're getting at. I just want to make sure if that captures, home health, hospice, and all the clinics, I guess we can make it work. I just want to make sure we're clear.
Joe, I'm having a hard time here understanding you.
Yeah, sorry, there's a bunch of background music where I'm at. And
Talk a little slower
next spot
too,
I have to
please.
talk, so.
Yeah, it's kind of all running together.
Okay, I'll try to talk slower. I just want to make sure that the definition encompasses, home health, hospice, and all the clinic operations. And then we make And the wildflower court does have to have a separate set of bylaws or be contained in here somehow.
Can I toss something out?
Yes, please.
The governor, I think the definition of who Bartlett Regional Hospital encompasses belongs in the first clause of the sentence, not in the second, where the definition of the board of directors, because the entity, we need to describe the entity in the first half. We may want to expand the purpose of the hospital, either one out of number 3 or in number 1 to include the other operations, which may expand.
Yeah.
We'd need to be inclusive because we've talked about expanding into other clinics and other types of operations. But maybe in the purpose, define what,
So I'm a little confused on where we're talking about. So, if I'm in 0111, is that what you're talking about?
Yep.
And so I'm suggesting, you're talking about two different sentences, but I only see one.
yeah, so I am talking about two different things. In 111, I would say after the governing body of Bartlett Regional Hospital and its related,
Here, can we just say unrelated operations?
but put it up there. You had originally put it down,
No, that was my intention, was just put it in that sentence. The governing board of,
but in the first clause, right after the first Bartlett Regional Hospital.
the governing body of Bartlett Regional Hospital and related operations, in parentheses, the hospital, shall be known as the board of directors of Bartlett Regional Hospital, the board. That's what I thought I was hearing.
Okay,
We good on that?
yeah, I thought you were putting it after the.
Okay, so then the purpose of the hospital, 1, to provide the management of facilities personnel to diagnosis and treat injury and disease. That of course is what previous interim CEO kept Kellings. I think we all agree with that. 2, to improve the health of community through education, clinical outreach, or other activities. And then 3, I'm hearing we need a 3. Is that right?
Well, I'm not sure where it belongs, but defining that our operation goes beyond the hospitals, the core hospital. We've used the word core, so I'm going to repeat it. Hospital setting to include the other services, the other operations that we provide, which are, and I don't want to be limiting in that because, but I don't know where exactly
Well,
it
the
belongs.
form that we've got here, if we're going to continue in the same form, is to something rather, to provide related services for some purpose. So I mean, that's the form of the sentence we're using, to do something for a named purpose.
I get that. That's why I'm not sure whether the definition of what the full operation is belongs there, but it belongs somewhere. That's all I'm saying. I don't have a suggestion for it right now, but
To operate,
Let us double check with Wildflower Court's regulations and get back to
That
the
sounds
board and make a recommendation for 0112. And we can, Kim and I can get back to you on that. Al, is that okay?
that sounds great.
They think they have to have their separate bylaws, but I just need to verify.
Yeah. So I think we can put a purpose in here, but I think this committee will have to have a separate bylaw for Wildflower Court. I'm almost
A
positive.
separate bylaw. So are you saying that we could?
I'm thinking this committee is going to have to have a separate bylaw for Wildflower Court. I'm almost positive, and I'm looking at Lisa, I think they have
Can we get
regulations.
sub?
I'm almost positive it'll have to be separate.
category. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, good. So then,
So if that's the case, while you're thinking about that, I think we should incorporate them by reference because we're the
Yes.
umbrella organization
Yes.
by reference in here
Yes.
rather than
I think we can have it in our purpose, but then we'll have a very short, because I have a copy of their old bylaws and it was very limited that they have in their scope and what they have. So I think we'll have a very small bylaws for them and we'll reference it in your overall bylaws.
So then is the committee comfortable with, I just put a little note here to check back with Gail. Just going to move on.
And Kevin, she's the guru for law.
Okay. All right. Are we good with that?
Administrator to be.
Okay. So then 113, we've discussed this issue of the calling things the administrator. We'll deal with that. Any other comments about 113? You know, the content of 113. Is this the purpose of the board? As you understand it? Do we want this in here? Like I say, I just
I
added it.
think we do.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, and this is not your last
Appreciate it.
chance to comment on it.
Yeah.
I just want you to look at this. I put that in there.
Well, from the previous version, I think this is much cleaner. I think it really exposes to the reader what the purpose of the board is, the expectations are.
Yeah, and I can't even see. Yeah, it's interesting because the whole 0113 is completely not on my copy. But yeah, I like the red lines.
Okay. I don't know why there's yellow under 1, 2, 3. Okay, but anyway, the physicians, let's get back to the physicians. Does everybody, does anybody dislike this definition of physician?
You're back on 141 now?
Oh, sorry, 141, yes.
Okay.
Does anybody agree that we need that definition? And is there anybody who disagrees with
No,
this definition?
I think we need a definition of position. I agree with you because I've seen a lot of people's ideas about what a position is. And I'm talking now about people. I'm not talking about us. I'm talking about patients who think PAs and nurse practitioners are physicians. So I think we should define it. I think it's fine.
Any comments from staff?
And I guess the second question is, for me, with that establishment of the definition of physician, do we want to expand it to provider, to the limitation to provide nurse practitioner to other providers? Or just those, because right now we credential a whole lot of people.
If you're asking me, physicians have, there's a certain prestige gap and a certain power gap between physicians and everybody else. I would think we would want to limit this to physicians, and I would think by physicians, I mean people with a doctor of allopathic or osteopathic medicine, and not optometrists, chiropractors, naturopaths, or anybody else who wants to call herself a physician. That's just me.
I don't have a strong opinion either way. I'm just tossing it out
Yeah.
there because.
Oh, no.
Me too. I'm just putting my comment, regards to
Yeah.
people. What do you think?
Well, I agree with you, Hal, because I mean, like we have 2 nurses on the board. I don't think we need to define what a nurse is. So, but I think it's good to define physician because we could load the board with 4 or 5 of them if, I'm not making any sense, but
Oh, you're making.
I think, yeah, I think defining what physician is good because we're saying we can have up to 2. And then, of course, if we have a nurse practitioner or a PA that serves on the board, well, they're definitely not physicians and they wouldn't fall into that category too.
Or even more troubling to me is we get 2 optometrists on here and now Dr. Yada wants to be on and no, we can't have him because
Right.
that's what I want to prevent.
I don't have any problem with that. Was just tossing it out.
Oh, no, absolutely. No, I think it's okay to just to define what physician is.
Okay, You ready to move on from there?
And are those two definitions fully encompassing all the physician practices?
That would be the only question that I would have.
Joe or Gail, or Kim, do you have comments on that? Those are who the, I can't remember what the state of Alaska's medical review board is. That's who they license. They don't license.
And it doesn't mean that they have to be credentialed by our med staff office. So.
Correct. They
just-
could be retired. They could.
Or they could be not on our medical staff. So.
Right. We're ready to move on from there?
Just one question. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah. Is there any concern of whether or not the license is correct?
If they're a retired physician, their license may not be.
It wouldn't matter, be fine. So here, we're talking, the word license means anything. If they were ever licensed.
No, I would interpret that to mean they have to be licensed currently.
And it doesn't say in good standing.
So I might think about that.
Well, I think the literal meaning of what's there now is they have to be currently licensed. And so that would mean that I think Dr. Urata still, I mean, just to be concrete, not to, I have no idea of whether he would want to be on the board again or not, but I think he's still licensed. I don't know whether he's credentialed or not.
Well, we don't, CDJ doesn't check to see if their license is valid. So someone can use the term physician or doctor and they aren't doing licensing checks.
Well, I don't know about allopathic and osteopathic medicine, but I do know about veterinarians. If you use a reserved word like veterinarian, it's a criminal matter. So whether they're checking or not, there's some.
Well, it kind of
Yes, it's-
implies that they are, because it says appointed from a list of those names submitted by the hospital.
Right.
So it's coming out of med staff.
Yes, but there's a difference between being a graduate of a medical school and holding a current license. You can still be a doctor and not holding a state license.
Yes,
Ask a question.
yes, please.
Can you guys hear? So my understanding would be if they're not licensed, they wouldn't be defined as a physician, so they'd fall within just a regular board member, right?
Yes, that was my intention. And so please speak up if you don't like that intention.
No, I'm just making sure we're talking to the same thing. So if we're referring to retired physicians that are no longer active and licensed, they would no longer be considered physicians. They would just be citizens. So they'd fall outside this parameter.
That was my intention. I don't know if that's what the board.
Okay, with
what the
that
committee
understanding,
is.
I'm good with it. So a lot of the things Gail's talking about, like if they're a student and they're not actually a doctor, they're just not defined as a physician here. Am I making sense?
It doesn't, yes, it does.
And if that's the case, we need to be if this language has changed a little, I don't know if it has from if the licensed is, I can't remember.
This is all new language.
Okay.
This didn't exist before.
We need to educate the assembly then so that they can do their due diligence as they did with on different matters with in particular, the attorney that applied. But we need to make sure they understand that the limitation is on currently licensed physicians. So if we had 3 physicians apply, 2 of them are currently licensed and Dr. Urata say is not, they would have eliminated one of those to meet the 2 physician limitations. So we want to make sure that we're communicating that well.
And what was my reasoning? Well, physicians who still have a stake in how things work, they have financial interests and all kinds of interests. Someone who has completely retired and is no longer licensed is sort of in a different position, that he or she's not trying to manipulate things for the benefit of his or her specialty or his or her practice, or wouldn't have the same motivation to manipulate. Anyway, this is not our final pass at it, but I want you to look at that. So this is something you can give more thought to between now and whatever we decide to do next. The other thing I want to direct you to is, did you?
Yeah, not that I want to continue to drag this out, but I just want to, caution, it seemed like we were making a jump to a conclusion that submitted by the hospital medical staff does not mean that the list came from current med staff. I don't read that the same. Does the rest of the committee read that the same?
No.
Okay,
This year, there actually was not anybody submitted by the
Right.
medical staff.
That was what I was going to say, is that isn't always the case.
okay. So then,
99% of the time it is, but this year they just didn't have anybody.
And they could nominate somebody who's not current.
exactly. And that was the reason for saying it, is that someone had mentioned, well, if they're coming from med staff, they're licensed.
Yeah, they wouldn't have to.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, anyway, well, let's look at that between now and then. The other thing I want to direct you to is committees. We made changes to our committee structure. This is,
Can the language in 0143, the term. It's on page 8, the top of page 8.
Well, actually,
Yes.
here it's not.
Pardon?
I said here it's in the middle of the page.
Oh. In my printed, so it's, it doesn't say anything about term limit in there. Currently, it's three-year terms is the term limit.
we didn't take that out.
It doesn't, say unless I'm missing something.
The term shall be 3 years until a successor takes office, except that the member appointed to fill a vacancy shall serve for the. I don't think I took anything out about term.
Well, I'm not saying you did. What I'm saying is if this is the old language, the reality is that there's a 3-year term limit.
Three-year term.
Yes, I'm sorry, three-year term limits. And we should put that in here.
Yes,
Yeah, I agree.
I agree with that.
Thank you.
It's fascinating how there are different copies of the bylaws. Yeah, it's weird because what you've got doesn't match it with what I've got. It's strange.
Where did you guys pull those from?
I just copied it, but like my copy doesn't have 0113 in it at all. So it's weird.
0113.
That was at the beginning we talked.
Yeah, let's not go back there. I'm just letting you know that it's just weird because and I had talked to Kenny about this in the past too, that, the board copy, the copies of the bylaws are different.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well, when in doubt, ask us,
so
and whatever's in the SharePoint should be the version that you're using.
Seems so true.
Yeah, I printed this right off.
So the direction to me is to put in some language about serve more than 3 consecutive terms.
Oh, yeah, because I heard you can come back after you sit out. I mean, you can come back after you sit out for a while.
Yes, it has to say consecutive terms.
Okay.
And that is defined somewhere. I've read that. I read exactly what you just said, so I'm
It's in
surprised. that it doesn't
CDJ.
say-
Yeah. It's on their boards and committees page.
So I don't want to go through this committee's language, but you'll see that there's new language about committees. There used to be language in some of these committees about how many members are on each committee, went through each committee one at a time, saying how many members to be on it. I took that out. That's placed in one place that it says there should be at least 2, I think. And then change the wording for each one of these to this committee will review whatever, will do whatever it's supposed to do. Because in some it said the committee, capital C, sometimes it named the committee. So go through these, see if there's anything you don't like about this. We're going to discuss it next time. But these should reflect our new committee structure. And there, I tried to make a consistent, I tried to make the wording a little more consistent from committee to committee.
Should we leave it as a minimum members and not deal with maximum? So that way,
Yes,
as we want to
that's what the
numbers, that we don't have to.
not less than 2 is what it,
Yeah. And then we don't have an executive committee anymore either.
Did somebody else want to say something about committees?
did you work on the definitions of the committees as well? Did you get beyond
What's the section?
154?
There's a lot of red here. So.
Okay.
One, but yes. Yes, well, yeah. This 154 should be quite a bit changed from,
I have a version behind this as well that I printed off. But it was, I think it was, what I printed off was the first round that you,
I sent you an earlier.
I think that's what I printed. I printed it.
Okay. The other thing I want to direct your attention to under motions and voting, I added some language. It changed the intent of what was in there before. So I'm going to direct you to motions and voting, section 2. And at the end, so there's some talk about if there's a member who's declared a conflict of interest, has to be excused. And then if president declares contact, that's carried over from what we had before. And then it says a different non-conflicted member may move that the conflict is de minimis and ask the board to allow the conflicted member to remain in the discussion. And we would want to do that, especially in cases where the conflicted member has a special expertise. I would hope people would only do it truly when the conflict is de minimis, that is having no practical consequence. And if the board as a whole passes that motion, then the conflicted member could remain in the discussion but not vote. And
Did we cover that in conflict of interest discussion?
We didn't. We covered conflict.
About, yeah.
We covered the conflict, and actually, I think it's CBJ's language in the conflict of interest, isn't it? I mean, I'm pretty sure that language was lifted from everybody in CBJ has to sign the same document. But I don't think it's necessary that it has to, I think the process is here.
Okay. Because I know when we wrote that, I knew what the intention was when we wrote the whole code of ethics and the conflict of interest thing, and it was because of, it was to partially to address one board member taking on issues personally. And I just want to be sure that whatever language we have in that, and I think you made it more succinct, but I want to make sure the language in that matches up with the language here. So we're not in conflict with our own.
what would be an example of this if we're debating something about the emergency room, and if we had an emergency room physician on the board?
Right.
The emergency room physician's not really going to, well, I guess the emergency room physician could have a financial stake in whether we bought a piece of equipment. If we think about it, we think, well, yeah, the hospital needs that piece of equipment. This isn't really a substantial issue of conflict of interest. Then we could all, and the person might recuse himself, or another more aggressive person might just not recuse himself, thinking in his or her own mind, this is no big deal. But if you had an extremely cautious person who declares conflict, and it's obvious to everybody, this is not a big deal, then we can just allow the person to remain in the conversation, and we could ask questions. Well, what do you use this device for? How often do you use this? These are questions that I would have that I would not be able to ask if the person was conflicted out.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. So we don't have to make a decision on it now, but I want to point that out to you. The other thing, we've gone through an hour already, we still have some more work to do. Code of ethics. So I tried to harmonize this with the attestation form. So I'm in sections 0176. And Deb, I think you had some criticism of this.
Well, my suggestion was to incorporate the code of ethics by reference into the bylaws, so it can be a more dynamic document and not have
Reference. And what would be?
so it would be the board shall establish a code of conduct and ethics. And, you know, whatever language that establishes the rules of the road. That's not what I want you to say, but something to that effect, and not have the details in the code of ethics, but it's harder to change the bylaws than it is to change the code of ethics. Bylaws have to go to the assembly. Code of conduct and ethics do not. If we come up with, if there's some issue that comes up that we want or need to add a statement to our code of conduct and ethics, if we include it in the bylaws, it's got to go to the assembly.
Makes sense.
Anita, where do we have a document about code of conduct and ethics? That we would,
The attestation is, the only reason there's a statement at the bottom is we want the board to acknowledge it, but that is our code of conduct and ethics.
okay, is that any comments from staff or other board members about just doing this by reference?
I think that's a good idea. Since we don't need to go before the assembly for that, and we did do the work on the code of ethics and the code of conduct, so we actually have it.
Okay. So then what I'd like to do now is just, I've pointed those things out to you. I'd like you to go back and have a careful look at the whole of the bylaws. I'd like to have one more meeting where we meet and agree what we're going to do before we send this to the full board.
Now, at the last meeting, we set these things to be done every quarter. So would you want to meet like next month?
Well, we have, next meeting is our last item on the agenda. So I was going to suggest that we have a special meeting in February to
Okay.
finish this work.
So we spoke with the attorney. Joe and I spoke with the attorney about how to get it on the assembly. And we knew that there would be need to be some good discussion with the whole board about this. So the tentative plan was to see if we could get it on the Assembly's April board meeting. So if we have a meeting in February, that gives us an extra month. And actually there should be plenty of time. Anyway, if we can get it passed at the March board meeting, we can get on the Assembly's April Assembly meeting for approval.
So then we could, so would you think that we would present this to the board, full board at the February board meeting? And then we would pass it in the subsequent month.
Yes. That gives the full board a month to chew on it, because we tend to schedule these meetings close enough to the board meeting that folks might not have enough time to chew on it.
Okay, so let's do that. We'll get to our next meeting at the appropriate time of the agenda. So we talked about the board of conduct. We talked about the draft bylaws. The board evaluation, I think I could not contain myself. I think everybody knows about my displeasure with our last board self-evaluation. I didn't think it was. Let's see, what have I got here? I didn't think it was. It didn't help me at all. And let's see, where have I? Anita, did you have the stuff in the packet where it just kind of I showed just a little screen grab of what we did before in the board packet. There were 30 questions. And of course, if we were part of the overexposed, we'd stick our pinky up and call this our instrument. Yeah, if you go down a little bit below, this just shows a little bit, the next page down.
It's the last page.
Yeah, so there was this 30 thing and 7 different very effective and fiduciary and all this stuff. And then when we got all done, we had something was 13% and something was 70%. Gobs and gobs of statistics that just filled up a spreadsheet and nothing really came of it. So to me, the only reason to go out and measure something is because you have some idea what you're going to do with the information you get. And so if we can go up a little bit, I just wanted to start us thinking about, well, how would we go about measuring something about board effectiveness? And so I would recommend a very few questions, like, does the board do an adequate job of setting long-term goals? Yes or no? And then an open-ended question, what could the board do to improve in this area? So that we're setting up the whole study with the idea of what do we recommend to the board on how to improve. And again, in my many years in working and measuring things and statistics, never want to go measure something if you don't know what you're going to do with the information. What I've learned after all that time. So
Could you scroll just?
these are just to get us started thinking about it. So I would suggest a very few questions. Are we doing a good enough job? Yes or no? How could we improve? And then
I do like brevity.
I would suggest that we give this to the board, but I also suggest we give this to senior leadership. And I also suggest we give a copy to med staff. And then what would be most interesting to me with the yes/no questions is how much harmony there is. You know, if the board thinks we're doing a great job and med staff doesn't, that's the information that we want. We don't want just what percentage of everybody says yes. And that would give us the information we need to improve.
So I think I mentioned to you before we finalize something like this, is there a regulatory mandate for board evaluations? And if so, and I couldn't find one, but I didn't look very hard. And if so, do we have, would this cover all the things that we're expected to evaluate about ourselves? That's my only question.
That's a very good question. Gail, do you know the answer to that?
There is a compliance component for board evaluations, and this probably would do it. I'd have to go back to double check. I think it would cover all of it.
Okay. I
Well,
just
let's-
wanted to make sure that there wasn't
Yeah.
a specific,
Yeah,
I knew that we had to do a board evaluation.
Yes.
I just didn't know if there was some
Yeah.
specificity in there.
And I certainly didn't want to make a decision about how we're going to do this today. I just wanted us to get started. My intent here is just to get us started talking about how are we going to do the board evaluation? We've got the rest of the year to work this out.
I think it's a good start like this.
The only other thing, and I'm not saying that we need to put it in, but in general, uh, there's usually a question about how we work as a board. Whether everyone comes prepared, whether the dialogue is collegial, those kinds of things, those kinds of questions. So
yeah, there's usually a question, usually on you evaluating yourself as an individual board member too. So giving yourself a self-evaluation. So that way you can feel your effectiveness. So that way you can give feedback of, are you receiving enough information from the organization to be an effective board member? That's the only thing that I was missing.
Okay, so we'll have another meeting where just go over the bylaws in February. Maybe at the following board meeting, the following committee meeting, we could maybe we could start working on crafting the questions we actually, this was just my intent to give you a straw man.
Question about that last page, Anita, in page 41. Is this an evaluation that was carried out
Yes.
in the past?
Yes, there were 30 questions and they were of this long sentences with lots of clauses. And then you rate it on a 7-point scale and you add and subtract and divide.
It came out of a
Were they-
generic governance
Came
type stuff, yeah.
The governance institute.
Yeah. Yeah, something that's available to anybody.
And they perform it for a lot of hospitals, so then you get this percentile for all kinds, for gobs of things.
So is there a report from that? Oh,
Yeah.
your level of enthusiasm.
No, I agree with that one.
Okay, CEO evaluation. I don't have any kind of straw man thing to get us started on that. Can we just discuss that briefly?
I mean, he just started it. This was, I think, something we were going to do later in the year.
Yes, so something, there would be something we would do it in the last quarter.
Yeah.
Joe, when's your first day?
We started in the third quarter.
Third quarter, okay.
Fourth-
Well, so we,
First day was
September 29th.
September, okay. So we should probably have something in draftish form by September, would you think?
Do it in the summer. Start it in the summer.
Does anybody have any thoughts on how we would get started on this? Joe, do you have any thoughts on how we should get started on this?
I have some thoughts. Deb and I had worked through a list of goals. So we took the things that came out of the transition document Ian put together and kind of formalized them. I had put together a list of what we've accomplished over the first 3 months, or what I've accomplished in my team, I guess. And try to lay it out. So I'm kind of working with Deb quarterly on these, and we talked about presenting it to the board as well as a starting point.
Well, how about this in the next board meeting? Maybe we should start by looking at those goals. And then we could
Yeah.
start talking about who will inquire, who will solicit information from.
I think that was
Next
Deb's
board
and
meeting,
I's
I think
plan.
Oh, they say board meeting, our next, not the next committee meeting, but the next regular committee meeting. The
Okay.
committee meeting for the second quarter. I'm sorry, I didn't mean board.
Oh, okay, thanks. Okay.
Next committee, next, not the committee meeting to work on the bylaws.
Yeah.
Board retreat, Deb, do we have some responsibility for the board retreat, this committee, don't we?
We do. We do.
What would you like us to do?
So Joe and I have been talking about, well, you guys all got a list of a doodle poll or whatever, a poll.
We have a date. I was hoping it was gonna be on a Saturday, but it doesn't look like it's shaping up that way, so.
That's what the poll was, to pick dates.
March 14th is the date that looked the best for that. The only one that could not make that date work was Dr. Raster. And that is a Friday.
Okay. I can make a Friday for it. Where are we gonna have it at? Do we decide that?
I'm trying to reserve the airport conference room.
I know when you and I talked, I wanted to go to the cheapest option, but I'm not the chair anymore, so.
Well, the decision about where to have it and so forth, that's not really a committee decision.
So the in general, the retreats that we've had a educational component and a strategic component to it. And that's where we're at. Joe reached out. Joe, do you want to explain who you reached out to and whose schedule we're trying to work around? I can't remember his name.
Yeah. It is Brock Slaybaugh. He's the Chief Operating Officer of the National Rural Health Association. So he'll come do education on board governance, and then he'll go over kind of the lay of the land for the healthcare sector. He'll do a federal, state, and local level, and what it looks like in the next couple of years, just educational. And the second part we were working on, I was trying to coordinate to get someone from Virginia Mason to come and discuss, do a session on strategy. If we could get them lined up. So I'm working with Tamara on that. And then we're also going to go through the strategic plan that me and the SLT members put together and present it at that point. Do it all in one day.
Could you guys all hear that?
Yeah.
That's the tentative agenda that Joe put together and presented to me. So if
we're going to have one more committee meeting before we get to the retreat. And Joe's putting together an agenda and a time budget. Then would you like this committee at our next meeting, the one we're going to have to discuss the bylaws? Should we just review the agenda and the time budget and make suggested changes if we have any? And otherwise, we'll just go with the recommendation.
if that works for your committee.
Yeah, I'm saying that as a statement, but I mean it as a question. That's a question to the committee, and it's a question to other members of staff. Is that how you'd like to proceed? Okay. Well, then that sounds like there's really nothing more for the committee to do at this time. All right, well, we've gone over an hour. I think we're ready for committee comments and questions. Any comments from the committee? Do you have any questions?
I just have a comment. One of the next steps that we need, and Joe has already taken a look at it, is once we get the bylaws squared away, is the board policies is next. Joe's taken a look at it, and of course it doesn't really tie with the, they seem to be a little bit independent of everything else that we have. So that should be on our agenda for the next step after the bylaws.
Okay. If I could go back just a little bit. So what I'm planning to do is my next step is I'm going to take my version 3 copy of the bylaws. I'm going to accept all the red lines. I'm just going to accept them all. Then I'm going to try to make my attempt at the changes that we discussed today. And then I'm going to route that to Anita to route to the rest of the committee. Can you send a Word version to everybody instead of the PDF? So then if you have changes that you would like to see, make them with track changes on so I can find them. Actually, if you would, make them with track changes on and then use the highlight feature. So I absolutely positively will find any changes you want. And I will try to harmonize what everybody gives me. And then that's what we'll discuss in February and try to just bring it all to conclusion.
Do we,
Okay,
I have
so
just a suggestion or question on that, Hal.
yes,
Can you hear me?
yes,
Would it
yes,
be,
please.
beneficial for board members not on this committee to see the red lines that you've already done and just add new red lines? So they can see all the changes that were made in the prior bylaws?
You're suggesting keeping all those red lines in there?
Yes, I would suggest keep the red lines in, so when the other board members not on the committee see this, they understand all the changes that were made.
Well, okay, it's so cluttered up, and part of the problem that I had is when I sent the red line version in, it didn't all format correctly when it got sent out again.
Can I make an amendment to that?
Sure,
If you accept the red lines, so it's a clean document, you can do a compare of two versions. So you can take the clean old version and the clean most current version and do a compare, and that document will tell you what the differences are without all the clutter of the red lines. It's a function in Word.
that's right.
Because a lot of it is formatting that I noticed looking at the red line. There was if you got rid of all the formatting changes, then the red lines are not as significant.
Okay, so that's,
Does that work for you, Joe? Rather than keeping the red line I think that it'll be easier on the non-committee board members to see a compare document than to try and sort through all the red lines.
Yeah, and it achieves what I was trying to get to, is just
Yeah.
so they can see all the changes.
That was my fear.
Yeah,
They get lost.
okay, I'll
Thanks
try
for that
one more
suggestion.
time.
yeah.
Okay, one more time, comments and questions. So I asked for committee, and if we're done with that, any comments or suggestions or questions from staff?
And then when it goes to the full board, we can just do an executive summary of major changes.
Are we ready to talk about our next meeting? I will say 7:30 doesn't work that well for me. I know I'm sitting here in a room with a bunch of early birds.
The problem is everyone knows that I'm going to be a minute or two late.
It's hard for me to eat during a workday. But Sundays work good, Lisa?
The weekends are great.
I can meet early, I can meet late. It's just hard for me to meet during the day. That's all.
Well, February, what do you suggest?
I'm going to be out from the 9th through the 27th.
Through the 27th. So we need to meet before the 9th?
Yes. Or after. I could meet on the 28th.
We need to meet before the board meeting, don't we?
If we're going to present the
If the
first round
plans
of,
to present, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if we can make that. We might just have to.
Well, there will be a quorum with just the two of you if he's not able to.
You could accommodate me early or late. I can guarantee I will be present.
What about lunchtimes?
It's really hard for me. It's just that I never know what my day is gonna be like. It's hard for me to schedule. It really is hard for me.
Yeah, I'm gonna be out of town till the 4th. Yeah, I just don't see how we have time.
I mean, I can meet as early as 3:00.
Is it conveniently? Is that conveniently?
What's that mean?
I mean, it would be convenient for you to meet at 3:00?
Yes.
Well, let's find a day and then we'll see. Yeah, I think it'll have to be after the 9th. The week of the 10th is what I would like to do, but I'll be unavailable the 13th and the 14th.
And so will I be unavailable. So it would have to be 10th, 11th, or 12th for me on that week.
I can do any of those 3.
Is there any way you could zoom in on one of those days?
Which day are you thinking?
The 10th, 11th, or 12th?
It might,
Conveniently.
it might be possible to zoom in on the 11th.
Should we pick the 11th then? The 11th at 3, would that work?
What day of the week is that?
Tuesday?
Tuesday.
Is that good for you?
Yeah. I just want to know what day it was.
What time?
3:00.
Are you going to be in a different time zone?
Yes, I am.
He's in a different country, right?
On the 11th, I'll still be in Seattle. On the 9th, we're going down on the 9th, and then we have my wife has a surgery follow-up on the 10th, and then we fly out on the 6 p.m. flight on the 11th to London. So
You're gonna be busy at the airport at that time.
4 o'clock, so 3 o'clock here, 4 o'clock there. I could probably do that. Chances are we'd be in the lounge somewhere. If not, like you said, you have Paul, if I can't make that work.
Yeah,
And
and
I was just actually looking at the 6th or even the 7th that's
7th is in general, the planning committee meeting.
that's 2 weeks.
That's at noon.
Oh,
Yeah. The question
And the
is.
6th would be is there a meeting scheduled on the 6th? Are you saying that's too early? Al?
I thought so, but maybe not. What does everybody else think?
That gives us 2 weeks to look at the,
Yeah, we give you 2 weeks.
I will say that we do have A3 presentations that day,
on the 6th.
How long?
scheduled from 9 to 1. Usually they get out early,
Well,
3:00 could work.
My only restriction is at 3. Whatever day you want to do it, just tell me
let's just do that.
which day.
The 6th.
Oh, the 6th. Oh, I thought we were talking about the 11th.
Either one works for me.
I threw out the 6th, so I might have muddled things, sorry.
Okay, so
The 2/6, he'll be here. 2/11, he'll have to do remotely if he's able.
does everybody else think we can get our work done for the 6th?
I'm not on the committee. So
If you are,
I guess I am an ex officio.
we need you here. We need you here.
Decide whatever day you guys want.
Okay, then let's change it to the 6th.
Okay.
And February 6th at 3:00.
That's a Thursday.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, anything else? I guess that brings us to the end of the,
Check the bump revenue cycle.
that brings us to the end of the agenda, so we're adjourned.
All right.
Thank you, Hal.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Good week, everybody.
Bye, Joe.